Today I travel with you to ancient Egypt. On a timeline I give a brief overview of this advanced civilization and will answer the question why they have not built a pyramid for Cleopatra. Stay tuned. This is Histomania, history on the timeline. When referring to Cleopatra, it's important to specify which Cleopatra in ancient Egypt is being discussed, as there were multiple individuals with that name. We are talking about Cleopatra VII, the woman you may know from the Asterix comics. She had love affairs with the Roman Caesar and Marcus Antonius, and she was the last woman to reign as pharaoh. We look at our timeline. Cleopatra was born in 69 BC and died by suicide on August 1230 BC. The place of birth and death was Alexandria. We see here on the map where in Egypt that is located. It is at the end of the Western Nile Delta. Now we have to go a little further out and take a rough look at the whole history of ancient Egypt. The Egyptologists divide the history of ancient Egypt into different phases, and I would like to introduce them briefly for understanding. The first pharaohs, that is the kings who ruled both Upper and Lower Egypt, existed already about 3000 BC. The pharaohs of the first two dynasties belong to the so-called early dynastic period. They were followed by the Old Kingdom. Next is a small gap known as the First Intermediate Period. There, the empire disintegrated and there was no ruler who could rule over all of Egypt. It was not until the Middle Kingdom that Upper and Lower Egypt could then be reunited. So in the 18th-17th century before Christ, this empire then also disintegrated again. There was a second interim period, but could flourish again with the New Kingdom. When this then also disintegrated, it came to the third intermediate time. During the late New Kingdom, Egypt was ruled by foreigners, such as the Sates and Persians, until the death of the last native Egyptian pharaoh at the end of that period. We are now in the time when Alexander the Great conquered everything there was to conquer. You may remember the year 333 BC and the famous Battle of Issos. In the following year 332 BC, Alexander also drove out the Persians and conquered Egypt. This was the beginning of the Greek-Roman period. And in that, there also lived Cleopatra. After the death of Alexander the Great, his whole empire was divided and one of his generals, Ptolemy, received Egypt as his territory. He founded a new dynasty and Cleopatra came from this line, so she was a Ptolemaic. Now that we know about the division of the phases, let's take a look at when the ancient Egyptians actually built pyramids. And that was extremely early. Already at the beginning of the Old Kingdom in the Third Dynasty they started to experiment with building them. The first known pyramid is the Djoser pyramid from the Third Dynasty. That's a step pyramid, so it's not even in a perfect pyramid shape as we know it from later. Also in the Fourth Dynasty, experiments are still to be recognized, for instance with the bent pyramid where one noticed probably during the building that one must reschedule so that everything does not collapse, or one had to be finished rather fast with the building. But then, maybe 100 years after the construction of the step pyramid, one was able to build a structure like the Cheops pyramid. With an original height of 146.6 meters, it was able to remain the tallest structure in the world for almost 4 millennia. It was then supplanted by Lincoln Cathedral in the 14th century. In the Middle Kingdom people started to build pyramids again, but at the latest in the New Kingdom the burials of the kings went underground. The most famous tomb from the Middle Kingdom is that of King Tutankhamun, which celebrated its 100-year discovery not too long ago in 2022. The last pyramid that a pharaoh built for himself as a burial place was the Ahmose pyramid about 1550 BC. And now you see why no pyramid was built for Cleopatra. She ruled at a time when the importance of the pyramids had already faded. At that time the pyramids were already thousands of years old and no longer part of everyday culture. Many of the pyramids had also already been looted and destroyed. The knowledge of how these pyramids were built was also no longer available. It was also a time when the Romans were on an expansion course around the entire Mediterranean, and Cleopatra's attention was more focused on political and economic matters than cultural or archaeological issues. She was particularly concerned with asserting her power and independence over the Romans. And one must remember that such a pyramid building would have swallowed any amount of money and resources. Cleopatra also had a very different background than the ancient Egyptians. As a Ptolemaic, she did not have the same connection to Egyptian culture and history as earlier pharaohs. It is interesting to note that when Cleopatra looked back at the builders of the Great Pyramids of Giza, the period of time between them and her was much greater than the period of time between us and Cleopatra. So Cleopatra is closer to us than she is to Cheops. I wish you Neb, all life, all well-being. Also check out the free timeline on histomania.com about ancient Egypt if you're interested in the topic. I'll link it to you in the description below as well. Until next time, when it's time again for Histomania, history on the timeline.